Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias.
Buenos dias.
I'm B. Gonzalez, the Dean of University College and one of this year's co-chairs of Orange Central, and I am excited, thrilled beyond belief to welcome all of you to one of our very special Orange Central events, the conversation with acclaimed author George Saunders. Aren't you as excited as I am? George has appeared in print, been featured on television, has gone viral in social media, all because of his magical and inspiring use of words and the effect they have on us. He is the author of several short story collections, including Civil War Land in Bad Decline, Pastoralia in Persuasion Nation, and most recently, 10th of December, which has spent 15 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list and has earned George a place as a finalist in this year's National Book Awards. He has been recognized time and again for his writings. Most notably, in 2006, he was named a MacArthur Fellow and a Guggenheim. In 2013, he received his Penn Malamud Award for excellence in the short story and was called out by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Doesn't that deserve, And his speech at the College of Arts and Sciences for a convocation this past spring, in which he described his own failures of kindness, has made him a household name. He went viral. How many of you have gone viral? Again, right? We're honored to call him one of our own, a graduate of Syracuse University and an esteemed faculty member in our renowned creative writing department. Joining George today, we're delighted to welcome a fellow author and associate professor in SU's creative writing department, Dana Spiotta. Dana is a recipient of the Guggenheim Fellowship and the Rome Prize. Now, before we welcome George and Dana to the stage, I have just a couple of housekeeping items. First, let's silence our cell phones and any other thing that beeps or makes noise. And secondly, at the end of the session this morning, we'll have some time for questions from the audience. But because Dana has to do something that's critical to the mission of this institution, she has to teach this morning. She will not be here for the question and answers, but George, I will do my best. Okay. All right. So without further ado, please join me in a warm and proud applause as we welcome George Saunders and Dana Spiotta.
Thank you all for coming this morning. And I think I am going to be here for the Q&A. I just have to leave at 10:30. Yes, and thank you for asking. Thank you to the Arents for asking me to interview George. It's always a great pleasure, and I always learn a lot when I talk to George. George graduated from the Syracuse MFA program. So tell me about your background and how you came to be at the MFA program, and then what it did for you as a writer and as a person.
Well, I was, my undergrad degree was from the School of Mines in Colorado, so I had a geophysics degree and kind of limped through that, in 9.5 years or something, and got out with, a 2.5 or something barely, and then went to work in Asia. And then it was kind of there, I got sick, and also got I kind of realized I wanted to be a writer when I was in Asia, and came home and kind of hitchhiked around and kind of just gradually let my degree expire, so that when I went back to work, the engineering degree was kind of worthless. And so actually I was sort of, honestly, in a bit of a downward spiral. I was working as a groundsman in Amarillo, Texas, kind of wanting to write, but I only knew one other writer who had published one story in a small magazine, so I didn't really get how you did it exactly.
And your family is not necessarily a literary, there weren't writers.
No writers in the family.
Right.
And also, my dad had just lost his business, actually. He had a pizza restaurant that burned down. So we were all kind of in a sort of unstable situation. And so I was at a really wild party that I won't elaborate the wild. Well, it was a crazy party, and for Amarillo, it was pretty crazy. There was alcohol, it was nuts. But in that, I'm a sort of a shy person, so I drifted away from the party, and there was a People magazine, and I read it, and it had an article about Syracuse, about Jay McInerney and Raymond Carr. There's a picture of them kind of standing chummily in some snow or something. And so I didn't know you could get paid to write, you know. So I applied and got a call from Tobias Wolff 2 or 3 months or whatever later. That was just life-changing. And I, you know, with this weekend and the Arents and all that, I was thinking about it, and it occurred to me that, you know, we all have kind of like shadow lives, you know, the lives that we would have led if something good, or I suppose bad. But in my case, if not for this intervention, I can sort of see that within probably 6 months, I would have had to find something to fasten my attention on, whether it was a relationship or taking some job seriously or something.
Bank robbery.
Bank robbery was a possibility, yeah. So it was such a crazy blessing that I know Syracuse confers on people all the time, which is to take somebody with some potential who hasn't really understood the full scope of the possibilities and plucking them out of that situation and putting them in a better one. So that happened to me. Got here and suddenly was surrounded by real writers, both students and faculty. And of course the light went on that 1, I wasn't working hard enough, 2, I hadn't read enough, and 3, that the world didn't really care if I became a writer. There were plenty of other people to fill the spots. So that I just remember that urgency in those first few weeks, like, holy shit, I thought I was doing pretty well, but I was working at about a 12% level.
Right.
So what a blessing to sort of be told by the world, yeah, writing is really hard and almost impossible, and there are people already working at it. So so get going.
So let's go from there, because you are now, and you've been, I think, for 17 years a professor here in the M.F.A. program, and the M.F.A. program in fiction here and in poetry is now top 5 in the country. What do you think makes this program good? Why do you think it is a good program? And what do you think an M.F.A. can do for a young writer?
Well, my model is always that the writer is going to be fine. You know, a young writer who's meant to write will be working hard and making progress. And the analogy I always use is that she's kind of, you know, running through a winter forest very energetically with a lot of passion, but she's wearing ice skates, you know. And it's kind of, I don't know, this is kind of hard. And then if we do our job right, it's like a frozen pond appears. You know, she's still using the same energy, she's still going the same direction, but suddenly for that 3 years, it's easier. And maybe she, in that atmosphere of sort of reduced hardship and increased focus, she can reach a little higher on her I'm mixing metaphors, personal tree, and in the woods, in the forest with the snow, but it's also spring. but really, so in that slightly rarefied air, she can get to that place where she's doing the thing that only she can do. That's the goal. So, what was the first part of the question?
Well, just in terms of why you think our specific program is strong.
Okay, so what we do, and you know, I do a lot of traveling to other programs, and I think what we do well, one of the things is just very mechanical, which is we fund everybody.
So key, right?
Yeah.
Because people from a background like yours would never have been able to come here.
Exactly right. If I'd gotten in, and I did get into programs where I had to pay, I couldn't go.
Right.
So what we can do is we can find somebody. We make our, as you know, Dana and I do this marathon reading every February with Arthur Flowers, our colleague. We read this year 566 applications for 6 spots. But when we read that, the thing that's wonderful about our program is when we read, we're only reading for talent. And if somebody is poor, it doesn't matter. If somebody's from a foreign country, it doesn't matter.
We don't care what aesthetic they're. I mean,
Right.
we don't have a program of one narrow view of how you should write that we're trying to inflict on people.
If somebody's good, they can come. And in my case, I couldn't have. I'll tell the story in a minute. But I came here with $150 cash. That's what I could raise.
And you were living in your car.
I lived in my truck for 2 weeks on Market Street because I didn't have the money. But our program, by funding people 100%, means that they can sort of relax during those 3 years.
Right.
It also, the way we set it up structurally, is that there's not a lot of competition for resources. Once you get here, you get what you get, and there's 3 years of work. So that's kind of a tangible thing. And there are programs in the country, as you know, that are, a kid is paying $70,000 a year to get an MFA, which it has to poison the water a little bit when you sit down and say, okay, now I've got to be a totally free spirit, and there's $70,000 going, repay me, write something really commercial. So that's what we have. And then on a more kind of touchy-feely level, we were very lucky, and I don't know how it happened, but at some point we got a certain vibe, which I would just describe as very kind of low-key, no bullshit, very loving. And everybody on our faculty I mean, this sounds like but if we really value teaching, we sort of put it first. So, and we have a lot of affection for these students that we have for 3 years. So that is hard to quantify, but really, really true, that a kid comes here maybe with, of course, as you would, with a lot of defenses up. Maybe I'm not good enough to be here. And then I think something in the atmosphere makes them think, well, I'm home, I can kind of relax a little bit.
Part of it, I think, is I was struck when I was coming to Syracuse and I was asking, what's it like to be in Syracuse, And because I was considering taking this job and you were talking to me about it. And you said that's sort of, there's something great about it. You're near New York, but you're not in New York. And there's something great about writing from Syracuse. And you lived in Syracuse for many years and wrote a lot while you were here. And maybe there's something just sort of unpretentious about this place that gives you more freedom than, say, living in Brooklyn. I don't know.
I've never lived in Brooklyn, but I know
right.
I'm very subject to peer pressure,
Right.
So if I was in here, I just felt like I was in this kind of microcosm of America where there was
right.
everything that is in America is here, a kind of small scale, and just kind of living here. Every day I had some kind of insight about American life or saw something kind of weird and beautiful that I wanted that would make me want to write. So I was always happy to be here, it was sort of, and I tell our students, it's not a totally active place culturally. You can get things here,
right.
but if you want to withdraw, you can. So it's sort of, you can see, that maybe about this time of year in their first semester, they're like, yeah, what do I do now?
Right.
And what they do is they go home and they work.
And they write,
Yeah.
because there's not so many nightclubs and things to go to.
Right.
But and the winter, of course, helps them be good writers, I think, too.
It does.
Suffering is good for writers. We've heard of this.
I mean, because it's easy, and I mean, anyone who's a writer or any kind of creative person knows that when you get to the moment of truth, the tendency is to take a break.
Yeah.
I've got to go research this now, or
Right.
And here, I think in a larger scale, you eventually get sort of, I don't know what the word would be, but the kind of the mood drives you back to your desk eventually. You can only take so many breaks, and eventually you settle into the thing itself sitting right in front of you, and you have to take it on.
Yeah, no, I think that does help to set the
We're making it sound like we're up in Siberia with the Mongol hordes and everything. But
Okay, so Siberia is a good segue to my next question. So you teach a legendary class on Russian literature, and in our M.F.A. program, we teach these literature for writers courses called Forms. Tell me why is reading so crucial for writers, and why Russian literature? Why is that important for young writers to read Russian literature?
Well, I teach that class mainly because I have gotten so much from the Russians. They were just huge in my life. And as you know, one of the benefits of these Forms classes is that you can teach what you're passionate about without having to justify it. I just love the Russians, so I'm going to assume that if I teach that, there'll be more power in it. But those stories also are so situated on simple, the big truths, life, love, infidelity, evil, good, and so I have a feeling that a lot of young writers need to be permitted or encouraged to take up the big themes. To just say, yeah, it is you should write a story about death once in your life,
Right.
Love is a totally valid topic, and you have to take it on. So to put these great examples in front of them, and then what we get to do is kind of look at them technically,
Right.
so we sort of discourage any kind of academic jargonizing.
It's not theory. It's really
not
close
theory.
reading.
And it's not history either.
Right.
It's just like, how did Tolstoy pull this off? We taught a story called Master and Man yesterday, where
Right.
it's a famous story of transformation where this total Scrooge-like money pig suddenly has a reversal and saves a peasant's life. So we just spent most of the time just looking at the moment where he changes. How is it that we don't? How is it that we buy that? It's
Right.
Potentially so sentimental. How, on a line-by-line basis, did you pull that off? And what's interesting is when you do that, there's always such interesting answers that are very technical, actually. And you can see the light go on where the students realize that to pull off a great fictive moment like that, you don't have to be some kind of seer, but you do have to be a great editor, a great interactor with your own text. So that's really, and then in that way, people like us who really don't know anything except how to proceed in our own work, actually,
Right.
can then kind of take what we've learned the day before, say,
Right.
and bring it to class, as opposed to sort of some big theoretical structure.
Right, so let's talk about that. There's an interaction between your own practice and teaching. And I mean, I find even just reading the submissions, you get to be a better reader for sure by reading other people's work and deciding, well, this is working, this isn't. You become and we sort of realize we actually match up in our opinions, that there's something here, right? That we actually do know something about this.
Right.
And that's sort of helpful. But how would you say over the years the teaching what impact has it had on your own fiction, and both good and maybe challenging too?
Well, the thing I realized this year, it's sort of quotidian, but I was earlier this month, working at home and kind of getting confused and couldn't quite figure out where I was. Came here, and this semester I'm teaching 6 hours in a row on Thursday, basically with a 15-minute break. So I stopped everything, prepped really heavily, went in there, had 2 really interesting classes, and it was almost like I'd gotten I'd gotten a full body enema base. I was like, wow, I forgot I had a problem with my story. I'm just kind of energized by these students, and all my stuff has been almost like if you got in a boxing match or something. You come out and go, wow, life is new. I'm bleeding. Life is new.
Sometimes they do give you energy.
The activity of doing something different clears your mind. But on a deeper level, the one thing I've noticed, and this is more and more acute as I get older, I think, you feel like your work, who knows, it could be dead in a year, it could last, but you'll be dead, so you won't know it. Unless heaven is self-Googling, which we have to pray that isn't the case. But you don't really know what your writing work will amount to. You can't know. But you can know that if you have a meeting with a student and something clicks for her, and sometimes, as you know, and I know you're a master of this, sometimes it's not just writing that clicks. It's life stuff that clicks. And maybe that back filtrates into the writing, maybe it doesn't. But I think we actually have a great privilege of taking people at that magic moment of their lives and sometimes kicking them up into greater personhood even. That, I think, endures. It endures just in the sense that person lives another X number of years and influences a subset. And as I'm getting older, I'm actually more and more convinced of the very real nature of that thing, how valuable it is.
Right.
And then also, for me, it's wonderful to have, 17 years of students. I had, for the first time, a former student a kid came up to me and said, "You taught my father." Liar! Age? No way. But then, to see that, for me, there's a sense of things don't change. There are always talented young people in the world.
Right.
Just as talented as you were, just as talented as Tolstoy's generation. That doesn't change. The flavor of the talent might change. But how heartening to know that always there are going to be 25-year-old kids who are newly fired up with the power of language and their own ability to do something. And that keeps you really kind of energized too, I think.
And it does feel like a privilege because we do get to work with such impressive students. And it's contagious. Their ambition, not about making successes of themselves, but their ambition, artistic ambition, is really kind of challenges you too. Sort of like, yeah, I remember. That's right.
That's right.
I'm not gonna. This is exciting. This is everything.
They
really feel like it's everything, and you remember it.
It kind of burns off any kind of cynicism that you might have.
Yes.
Yeah.
So another thing I want to talk about with the undergrads is that the workshop at the undergraduate level has become incredibly popular. It's sort of exploded in the last 5 years. Why do you think that is?
Well,
people want to study fiction.
Yeah, I have a sense. There was a book a few years ago that I didn't read. This is what I do. I tend to just read the summaries and then act like I read the book. But there was a book that I think the idea was that in an increasingly wealthy culture, there's this sort of idea that the only valid jobs are artistic jobs, something like that. The book, maybe I dreamed that book. I don't know. But I think people, young people, feel that it's sort of a glamorous job. But what I noticed has changed in the last five years or so is that people who want to be writers automatically think M.F.A., which I think is unfortunate. Actually.
Right.
I always say this, there's 2 big false ideas. One is that if you want to be a writer, you have to get an M.F.A. Demonstrably untrue. The other one is if you get an M.F.A., you'll definitely be a publisher.
Right.
And the second one is weirder to me. I was at a really good school. I won't name it, but a really good school. And this nice young undergrad came up to me and he said, my parents are kind of upset that I'm a creative writing minor. I'm kind of like, yeah, I don't blame him. But then he said, can you assure me that I'll have success? Can you tell me something so I can assure them that I will be successful in writing? I thought, I don't even know you, And I said, usually I'm kind of new age and sort of like, oh, you're groovy. But instead, I couldn't help myself. I just said, no. I said, in fact, I mean, statistically, you won't. And that kid looked like it was the first time in his life he'd ever gotten pushed back, you know. So I think there's this idea, it kind of offends me because, you know, when we were coming up, I'm older than you, but even in your youthful generation, there was this idea that you were
Much younger.
much younger. when you were, you know, when you committed to the artistic path, you were doing something kind of batshit. You know, you were taking a big chance, and you were leaving your culture and your potential behind and taking a big risk.
And you were certainly going in the non-material direction.
Exactly. And now I think there's a sense that the kids kind of want to have it both ways. That this is a career. It's fine. It's perfectly safe because I'll go under the shelter of the M.F.A. and everyone will protect me. And sort of an idea like, yeah, it'd be cool to have a book out. I could deal with that. You know, like, what? So,
I think one of the things that we do at our M.F.A. program is we are very clear about stoking artistic ambition, but also being realistic about how difficult it is to make a living from writing, how nearly impossible it is, and that you have to do this for other reasons. There are much better ways to make money in the world.
I don't know if you know this, but we do these things that we haven't come up with a better name for these. So if anyone has, we call them jams, which I don't know. But we just kind of have these frank, sometimes Friday afternoon talks with the students about some aspect of writing that doesn't come up in class. So one year I thought, you know what would be really good is just thinking about my own trajectory and stuff. Let's talk money. Let's talk about the actual money.
I was there for that.
Were you there? Okay, all right.
It was a sad conversation.
It was a sad conversation. I had it all planned out, and I thought it would be so frank, and the kids would really love it. And I spelled it out rather too directly. Like I just said, here's how much I got for my first book, and they went, oh. And then I said, now here's where it went, and 20% to taxes or 30%, my kid's school, da-da-da-da. And then there was nothing left. And I said, and also, by the way, I got paid in 4 installments over 4 years. And you can see the air just went out of the room, you know. And that was only the beginning.
And you're the lucky top percent.
Yeah. So I made that speech, and I thought, that was too much. That was not too much information. But then the funny thing was, the next week, in one of these talks, one of our students got a $500,000 contract. So
they're like, we'll just pay attention to that.
That guy's crazy. He's just a loser.
So in today's New York Times, they have the actual headline is, for better social skills, scientists recommend a little checkoff. They now have this they've done this study that shows that, and I'll quote to you, it found that after reading literary fiction as opposed to popular fiction or serious nonfiction, people perform better on tests measuring empathy, social perception, and emotional intelligence. Yeah. Why is that? Why is literary fiction, what they mean by literary fiction, that they use Don DeLillo and Wendell Berry here, they're talking about a kind of difficulty, I suppose, but why do you think that makes people...
I think it's real simple that you're doing sort of a guided visualization. You're saying, once upon a time there's this guy named Henry, and the reader goes, really? And then you start talking about Henry, and in that instant you're not only yourself anymore.
Right.
And actually, in a truthful way, you're Henry, but you're also the author
and yourself.
And they say Henry walked up a wide dirt path. You go, and you supply the wide dirt. You supply a path. And so then suddenly you're in this really interesting guided visualization that's being guided by a person you don't know. So in that process, you're finding out that you have a lot in common with that writer you don't know, and with Henry, who doesn't exist.
Right.
But somehow you're being invited/guided to be empathetic with someone that is not you.
And someone who's complicated. Because I think one of the differences here between commercial and literary is that the commercial fiction was reassuring the reader, while the literary fiction was forcing the reader to be a little bit more uncomfortable about who they were relating to or why.
Yeah, and one thing I noticed in this teaching this Tolstoy yesterday, one of the most pleasant fictive reading experiences is when you've started to judge a person in this direction, some fact comes and makes it ambiguous. So in this story, Master and Man, this guy is a very money-grubbing sort of fellow. And then suddenly there's a moment where he starts explaining, sort of an interior monologue why he's money-grubbing. And you kind of see that he's vulnerable in that, So I think it's a really wonderful enactment of something that happens in real life where you start to judge some guy, and in the midst of that, some counterfact comes and you go, oh, yeah. And you have to exist in that suspended state of judgment, which I think is really kind of a sacred state.
I think it's the key. Jim Shepard, the writer Jim Shepard was saying that, I heard him give a lecture, and he was saying that there's the conflict in the story that the character has, but there's also the conflict that the reader has about the character, and that's the real drama
Right.
of fiction.
That's beautiful. There's a story by Mary Gordon, who's a Syracuse grad, and called The Deacon, which I think is there's a little deacon character who's kind of unlikable, and you don't like him, and the writer doesn't like him, and the other characters in the story don't like him. And you're sort of enjoying not liking him in a certain way, because he's not likable. And then at some point, he turns to the character and basically says some form of, "You're the only person who's ever treated me with any respect." And as a reader, you feel totally implicated in that
Well,
moment.
that's another key, is implicating the reader,
Yes.
I think, yeah.
So back to that, what Jim described, you've been coasting along in your habitual state of judging and enjoying judging, and the story and the character have called you on it, and you've caught yourself up in it. It's really complicated and beautiful.
Well, maybe the last question before we go to the Q&A is that interestingly enough, in this same article, it said that the very same readers who were in this study, preferred the commercial fiction. So let's talk about reader pleasure, which is, I know, something you consider,
Yes.
and these other things that we're talking about, which is sort of a reader difficulty or
Yeah.
challenge
Yeah.
as well. How do you negotiate? How do you reconcile those, or keep them both in play?
In writing, and teaching writing, you always come up against these binaries. Realist or experimental, funny or not. And I think often when I get to those binaries, I just want to dissolve the binary. So when I think about readerly pleasure versus difficulty, I always kind of say, well, I want to be precisely as difficult as I need to be to produce the highest form of pleasure.
Okay,
Right.
great.
So in other words, if I'm describing a moment, an actual moment, first of all, I want to inhabit it deeply through the process of revising it many times, and then when I get to the crux of it, I want to use language that's just perfect to get it. If it has to be hard, I love my readers; they'll deal with it. If it's hard just to be hard, they're going to
Right.
feel me being a jerk.
Right.
If it's too easy because I'm worried about offending them, they're going to feel like I'm condescending. So I think in a certain way the dichotomy vanishes
Right.
if you just say, I want to communicate.
Right.
So Faulkner, at his best, is using exactly the kind of language he needs to blow your mind,
Right, and that is a great pleasure.
Yeah,
Because
it is.
you do feel reassured about human beings, even as you're not reassured about your own petty vanities or whatever.
Exactly.
So it's a deeper kind of reassurance.
It is.
So people actually will get pleasure.
And I think the reassurance is that feeling when
Recognition, I guess.
recognition, and also the idea that the writer is looking at you and saying, I see you.
Yeah.
I don't know you, but I see you, and I'm assuming that you're every bit as smart and compassionate and troubled and confused and fearful and blah 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 as I am. Let's talk,
Yeah.
As opposed to, hey, yeah, I know something you don't know. Get over here. I'd like to
Right,
dump
right.
some shit on you. It's much more,
Expecting a lot of the reader and respecting the reader, and then that pleasure that you get when they're
just like it's like engagement,
Right.
Like we're. So I think for me that's been lately, especially my mantra is just communicate, and communicate on the deepest level you can, given that you're limited.
Great. Okay, so I will open it up now because it's 10. So if we have questions, you can want to there's a microphone here. If you raise your hand, there's a question right there.
I might not need a microphone.
Okay.
Don't.
I'm here with a couple ladies who read your book in a book club in Spiotta.
Sorry.
It was great. And one, I wanted to say that it was very interesting to read it with a group where there was really visceral reactions. That I think when you read something alone and you're possibly choosing the book, like I chose the book for the group, that I enjoyed your work, and then to sit with a group and sort of really get intense reactions to a lot of the stories was really great. But I do have an editorial question. I was wondering, of the stories that were chosen for 10th of December, was there one that an editor said to you, don't include this, or had challenges with, or said, why are you including this?
Do you have one in mind?
Well, the short ones, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
And you talked a lot about the really short stories and why, in a sense, they were there. What would happen if they weren't there?
Right. No, that's the way to think about it. In that case, the only thing that happened editorially was that long story, that Central Girl Diaries, wasn't in it when I sold it because I hadn't figured it out. I've been working on it for 14 years and I hadn't figured it out. So I sold the book without that, and I liked it, but it felt maybe a little bit. I like the feeling of something that is big and sort of over the top, and that you go, wow, really, one more, thing. So that was a last-minute edition where I kind of raced to get it done. I think about this time last year I was still finishing it up. And other than that, there wasn't a lot of discussion of taking things out because I really tried to be. I don't write a lot of stories anyway, so I would say probably there might have been 1 or 2 stories I wrote during that 7-year period that I didn't put in. So in a certain way, I just kind of laid them all out there. But that kind of thinking is what you do when you're putting a collection together, and it's really hard because you don't want to make a mistake. And my thinking, I took a bunch of index cards basically and put the first and last line of the story in the title, and just got down on the floor and moved them around for a weekend, you know. And that one story sticks as the short one. That was actually written in '94, so that's a little bit, you know, kind of offset. But yeah. Anyway, thanks for reading it. I hope they still are your friends now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry. I wanted to ask a little bit about Escape from Spiderhead. I think that a lot of times, when people would read a story like that, they think, oh, he's trying to do social commentary. Except I'm not sure that's actually what you were trying to do. Do you mind kind of going into that story a little more and sort of explaining how you came to that subject and
Sure.
sort of the process when you wrote it?
Yeah, I mean, I never think social commentary because when I do, the story is always dull, you know, because then it's preaching. So on that one, really, you know, what actually happened was that I had been writing some other story. I don't remember which one it was, but sometimes I'll, you know, let's say that this is the highest diction you can attain and still retain, you know, grammar. I had been writing down here on purpose, kind of not exactly dumbing down, but simplifying down a little bit. And I kind of had gotten tired of it, and I wanted to kind of stretch, you know. So I just wrote that section of the story where he takes the drug that makes him talk better, basically. And I didn't know what to do with it, but I really enjoyed that stretching. And then I thought, well, so why would, you know, how can I account for that tonal shift? And I thought, a drug. You know, he gets a drug that makes him talk better. And then that became interesting. And so I tend to start with some little seed like that, and then you start going through it. And what happens then is that the theme or the idea or the social commentary comes out naturally. Instead of being the main focus, it's an ancillary benefit, you know. So for me, I just love the idea that you could find a kind of plot point that would allow you to write in different funny registers, and then you say, well, what would do that? How about drugs? Okay, you know, and then you're off to the races.
Hi, I am an English major. My senior seminar, I graduated from Colgate University, and we did a senior seminar on James Joyce's Ulysses, which I could not comprehend on my own, but class really made it the most influential novel I've ever read. Mainly me saying, I'm stupid, I don't get this, can you please help me? And I was wondering, as a writer, but also as a professor, when you're writing something, how much do you expect the reader to engage with others and have that discussion to make it impactful?
Actually, Dana teaches a legendary forms course on Ulysses that students really love. Well, you know, actually, this book was the first book of mine that actually sold any, you know. So I had that really wonderful experience of having the book go out not only to the people that should have read it, but some who maybe shouldn't have, you know. And so I actually really loved it. I got a lot of confused letters, angry letters. And I had a great one from a woman in Vermont, and she sent me the book back. She said, I will not have this in my house. And I thought of giving it to a friend, but I like my friends. And you know, like this. Really. And so part of her thing was the swear words, which to me, I don't really, that doesn't sting. But then she said, these stories, and she was very articulate. And she said, these stories, their main way of proceeding is by cruelty. You know, so I wrote her this lengthy, you know, former Catholic, very defensive, cringing letter. But I like that people would be troubled by it. Actually, at first you don't. At first you want everyone just to like it. But if you see that you get under somebody's skin and make them really angry, that's kind of good. And it's also good because then it makes you cross-examine yourself a little bit. You know, I'm not a writer who, when I send something out, thinks it's even. I mean, I think it's good, but I don't stand by it like I would some kind of great truth. I'm like, this is the best I could do. I hope it does something for you. It's not. These things didn't actually happen. We're playing a game together, you know. But I really love that quality of energy that's come out of this book, even though a lot of it has been sort of trouble. But yeah, I think that's what you're trying to do ultimately. You know, if you talk to Hemingway or Faulkner, they were like, of course, you know, or Dickens, of course I want to cause ripples somewhere, you know, and I do want people I love the idea of people getting together and talking about it or arguing about it, or a divided book club maybe, say, you know.
I think it's kind of wonderful to think about how many people have your book, and it feels almost subversive. You've sort of snuck thing under the radar where there's actually this really challenging, exciting, and pleasurable book to read.
Yeah.
That you know, especially, I think it's just thrilling.
Well,
it doesn't happen very often, you know, that a book of your caliber reaches a wide audience, and
You
it's
know,
supposed to happen.
One of the arguments that I can hear opening up is this idea that darkness. What is darkness in fiction about? Is there a function for it? Is there a use for it? What's the, you know, is there a value to somebody pointing out darker truths, or even making uncomfortable nastiness?
Absolutely.
Art has always done that, and I think in our, especially in sort of in our critical culture right now, there's a sense that art is supposed to be transparently good for you
And likable.
and likable.
So we like everything, right?
Yeah. So I think it's kind of all right that it's, I mean, still it bothers me. You know, like I wrote a 4-page letter to that woman and
But
sent her
did she
flowers.
respond
and,
to your?
She did respond. She responded kind of like, "Oh, that's good to know." No, she said, "Thank you very much for giving me a different way of thinking about fiction. I'm in my 80s, so this is all new to me. I do want you to know I did read your book 3 times.
Wow.
So, you know," and then she said, I'll write more later, but right now I have to, my garden is calling me. And then she never wrote back after that. So,
That's great, though. That's great. There's, up here, we have, down here. Yeah, go ahead. Down, I think this gentleman in there. Up there. Okay.
Yes. You speak about your love for Russian literature. Can you read it in Russian?
No.
That's the first thing. And then your texts are being translated to the other languages. Are you able to read it in other languages?
no, I'm that classic American who, you know, there's that old joke about if you speak 3 languages, you're trilingual, 2 languages bilingual, 1 language American. So I don't read any other language.
And you speak about being a teacher and teaching.
But sorry, I can't hear you.
About your program.
Uh-huh.
Very exciting. Is it open to international students
Oh, yeah.
in English?
Oh yeah, we almost every year we have almost
Talk
every.
about that because it's very interesting.
Yes. Well, we get applications from all over the world, and basically, you know, they have to be able to be wonderful in English. That's the first prerequisite. But we've had students from China, India, where else recently? Africa, some African students.
Where's Chrissy from?
From Bahamas.
Bahamas.
And actually, you know, in that Russian class, I have a young woman who's, I think, 1st generation Russian, maybe 2nd. So
She's Russian American.
She speaks Russian, yeah.
Mhm.
And that's really wonderful to read Tolstoy and say, Anna, read it to us in Russian. She read us some Gogol in Russian the other day. And it was just one of those amazing teaching moments where we couldn't understand it, but the music was there. And so if we get in a place where we're not sure, we just turn to Anna and say, how would you read it in Russian? And she tells us. So we try to, the only problem that I've seen with that is that the American kids are very indoctrinated in the workshop method. So we've had sometimes students, especially from Asia and Africa, come in and just not like that method of collaborative thing. They have maybe a more traditional idea of the writer as this kind of iconic figure who makes all the decisions, and the kind of new age aspects of workshop, it takes a little getting used to for them. You know, they kind of resist the idea that everybody's sort of pawing through their work and so on. But on the other hand, we had a wonderful Pakistani student here during 9/11, and it was really powerful to be in the middle of some kind of political discussion or political aesthetic discussion, and have him suddenly step up and very articulately represent a completely contrary and previously unimaginable viewpoint. That was really enriching. You know, so.
Yeah. I think up there, right?
I wanted to ask about your wonderful graduation speech that recently went viral. I wanted to ask you how you chose that topic, why you think it resonated so strongly. I got sent it, I don't know, probably 20 times, and the impact that it's had on you, separate from your book publications.
Sure. You know, it was just Dean Langford asked me in the middle of this big book tour to do it, and I went, yeah, all right, I'll do it. And then it came about a week before, and I thought, oh, I got to write that. And I had given a speech very similar to that to our daughter's middle school graduation at M.F.A over here in Syracuse. And so I thought, oh yeah, I'll dust that off. And then I couldn't find it. I had my meticulous filing system. I don't know what it is. So I just kind of wrote it from scratch. And I think what made it, I don't know, I didn't expect that to happen, but I think what made it resonate was that I was basically in the original incarnation talking to my daughters. I knew my daughters would be there, my wife, all my daughters' friends would be there. All these teachers have been so generous with her. So I felt like there was a kind of intimacy, in that. You couldn't really BS too much. You had to speak directly. And I think some of that carried over. And I also noted when I got in the dome, I felt sort of really loving, towards this community that I've been part of for all these years. So I think that might have been part of it. But other than that, it was really surprising. And it also, it's terrible because now you have to be kind all the time. No more shoplifting. That's right off the record. It was really fun to have that happen.
I was just curious. I have no idea if you want to go in any direction you want to with this. I love, my favorite story of all is the Persistent Gappers of Fripp.
Oh, thanks.
And I wondered if you approached that in any way that was different from your other work, if you decided halfway through, oh, this is actually for children and not what I was intending. Just what about that made that a unique work from your end of things?
Sure, yeah, no, you're right. It was very different because our girls were little, and I had this routine of going in at night and just improvising a story for them, which for me is hard because I'm a real rewriter, so one night I improvised something like that. I thought, oh, maybe I'll formalize it. And the big difference for me was I knew it was for kids from the beginning. Had my daughters in mind. And I think what happens there, I noticed something about my mindset was I allowed myself a happy ending, which at that point in my work I never did. If there was a car, I wanted it in the ditch. And so because it's for kids, I thought, all right, so my normal work, I think, at that point for sure, existed to say, it was an embodiment of that Chekhovian idea that every happy man should have an unhappy man in his closet with a hammer to remind him by his constant tappings that not everyone is happy. So that was kind of the mindset of my adult fiction was, yeah, we've got it good, but let's look at this person who's in misery, This was the opposite, which was to say, even though sometimes things are scary, they sometimes come out well. You might have resources that can make a positive outcome. So it was kind of liberating to have that permission, to say, yeah, we have to get out of this in a sort of happier spirit. So I think that was why it was a little bit different.
More questions?
Can you talk about your next works in progress right now and what your plans are?
I'm superstitious. I have something in progress, so yes. No, what I think about that is I'm not sure if you would agree with this, but I think most creative people have some desire to get attention. And in the best case, you refine that into you want to get attention for something that you've done remarkably well. So for me, part of that dynamic is to withhold it until it's perfect, quote unquote, and then put it out. And I find that if I let something out early, it dissipates all that energy of concealment. And even talking about it, I've told maybe 4 people, including Dana, a little bit what it is, and I'm kind of, protective of it, so that it's my secret until 4 years from now. And then but something is going on, and luckily I started it like 15 years ago, so it's pretty familiar, and it's kind of, it's got words in it. I'm kind of doing some punctuation things and kind of paragraph breaks, the whole thing,
Any more questions?
How do you pick your stories? How do you decide which one to land on and spend all those years working on it?
Yeah, that's the big question. Well, what I do really is I'm not a big fan of having an idea, because in the past what will happen is I'll have an idea, and the idea sometimes contains the seeds of the ending, and suddenly it's already done. The mystery is out of it. So I try to keep myself from having ideas about stories, and instead start with just some little fragment, a couple sentences, maybe a setting, And the idea is if you start with that and kind of start really messing with it on the line level, it actually grows out like a seed crystal in biology class. It'll grow out organically, you know, in the direction of its own natural energy. And then sometimes in the process of that, you'll say, oh yeah, this is a story about this, or this will probably happen in the story. But I think the trick is, for me, is to keep your conceptualizing out of it early. So really, the answer to your question is I just look at which little fragment is growing the most aggressively, you know, getting a little bit out of my control. Or you know, we talked about this yesterday, when you get up in the morning and you think about the 4 or 5 things you have going on, what gets you excited, you know? Like this idea that somehow writing is actually supposed to be a joyful, sort of naughty thing, kind of fun that you do, kind of like playing with blocks or something. So if you look at 3 things in progress and 2 of them are like, oh God, that's so hard, you know, and the 3rd one gets you a little giddy, I would always go to the 3rd one. So that's really sorry.
You work on several projects at once?
I always have, yeah. For that reason, because that way, you know, if you have a project that's a little dead, and you take your Puritan work ethic, and I've got to work on it, I always make it worse. If I don't feel happy and inspired and kind of joyful about it, or energized about it, I make it worse. So that way you can look at the 4 things and go, you know, you 3 guys are dead to me at the moment. Step out of the room so I don't mangle you. And then the 4th thing that's a little bit alive, you can go there. And this project that I'm not talking about is a little longer. So that's the same thing. You can sometimes say, well, this part isn't interesting to me, but this part is. Let me try that. So with my students, I always say that you're really trying to occupy a zone about which you have strong opinions. And when you don't have a strong opinion, what rises to fill the gap are ideas. And ideas are deadly at certain stages to fiction writing. Right? So I know I've had so many projects that I've messed up because I didn't have any opinions, visceral opinions, but I had some intellectual ideas. So it's like a relationship. If you were dating somebody, or dating several people, let's say, and two of them you didn't have any strong, well, you'd want to spend time with the 3rd one, and when in the story when the fun goes out of it, the ideas take over, and then you kill whatever you're working on. I do anyway.
There's a question down here too. Okay.
I wondered if you would have any accessible workshops or forum sessions that might be open to high school students in the community.
I think in the area.
Yeah.
We don't officially. We don't. But if you email me, we could. If the kid wanted to sit in on a forms class, they sure could. We don't do any sitting in on the workshops because that's high level and it's 6 people and it's kind of private. But yeah, I would certainly. We've done that in the past. So if you email me at my SU account, I'd be happy to set that up.
Ms. Stillman has a question. Yeah.
Hi. I'm wondering if you read much nonfiction, and if so, sort of what are the patterns and the themes that you gravitate toward?
It's such a cliche, but I'm a middle-aged white guy, and I love history. That's why the History Channel exists, I guess. But I also, because of my background, I'm not actually that well read, and my knowledge of history is very spotty. So what I'm trying to do now is get informed in the bigger world more than I am. So I'm reading right now A People's Tragedy, that history of the Russian Revolution by Orlando Figes, which is amazing. And then a book called Patriotic Gore by Edmund Wilson, which is a beautiful study of the literature of the Civil War. And I'm finding that, my talent, I realized early, is very small. And it's got a very small room to work in. So one of my sort of midlife or past that jobs is to make that room a little bigger, just to be a little more cognizant of historical things. So yeah, I'm actually almost reading only nonfiction these days.
As Simplicity Girls, he wins 10 grand in the lottery. So
Yeah.
10 grand, I mean,
Yeah.
these days doesn't seem like
No.
a lot of money to change your life.
Right.
How long did it take you to come up with that figure? Is that just how you pull that figure?
You know what, honestly, that story came out of a dream that I had while we lived in Syracuse. And at that point, 10,000 was a lot of money for us,
Because my first job was $10,000. At the
Yeah.
time, I thought, God, I'm rich.
Right.
$10,000.
No, exactly.
$10,000.
There were times in our life where we had, where $10,000 would have made it. I remember one time, the first time I sold a story to Harper's, I got $2,200 at Christmas time. And I remember taking that, and we put some of it away, but I had $800 or something, and I was going to go buy Christmas presents. And I got $800 cash just because the credit cards were always bouncing at that time. So I thought 800 cash, and that was the richest. I never felt so wealthy, you know. So anyway, in that story, I actually almost revised that number upward recently, but I thought, let it stay. 10,000 is kind of good. That story was that was the one that took 14 years. So that maybe inflation should have raised that number up a little bit over the years. Yeah.
One more question here.
Yeah, I'm kind of like that lady from Vermont, but and truth is stranger than fiction. So, what's happening locally? There's a lot of crazy beep going on. How does that affect your life on the Hill and in the larger community? Because you talked a little bit about being grounded in the community, and if you follow the news at all, there's a lot of crazy.
Yeah. I guess my feeling is there's always been a lot of crazy shit going on, and we have a particular flavor of crazy shit at the moment, but I think fiction, I would say, exists to address the eternal crazy shit. The things in human beings that cause us to always be in flux and in agony and so on. So at least when I'm writing fiction, I tend to take in all that stuff and try to get out in it as much as possible. Like I did a thing a couple years ago where I went to live in a homeless camp for a week, incognito, but then at the time of writing fiction, I think you sort of say, let's not get distracted by the temporary or the ephemeral, the temporary manifestation, but let's go for the deeper thing, which back when we were in caves, there were still neurotics, and there are still people whose desires were impossible to meet, people who loved and then had the loved one perish. All the things that make us human were there in every single thing. So in fiction, I think part of the wonderful thing is you can kind of recuse yourself from the temporary and retreat into those eternal verities, the eternal problems. And then, of course, you come back around and put contemporary clothing on them. So a story about longing might take place in the Destiny USA, or a story about death might be somebody gets hit on the thruway. But at the heart of it, you're trying to, sort of do a sustained meditation on the things that are eternally beautiful and troubling about life on Earth.
Yeah, I think that's it. Oh, one more question.
My favorite two characters in the short story collection were the two adolescents that named them at sea. My husband, I was reading this last night, and he happened to be in the same period. And the question came up: was the villain who was the attacker, was he meant to be Ukrainian or Russian American, or just happened to be an association from the
Oh, is this in the first story?
Victory Lap you're talking about?
No, he's not Russian.
He's not.
No, what happens is it's there's a church here in Janesville. That one with the blue dome. That's why I put the story, just because I drove by it every day. So the idea is that the kid lives close to the Russian church, and when he first sees that guy, he thinks, wait, is that right? He thinks he's a Russian. He thinks he's from the church. So he says, Ruski, good lead Boris, but the guy's not Russian. Yeah, no.
Hi, I think I read somewhere in one of your interviews and you mentioned something about the softening effect.
Softening effect?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by that and why it's important?
Sure. I think what it means, kind of what we talked about earlier, empathy, is that if I don't, let's say I have a prejudice against Russians, which I don't. I love Russians. But let's say I do. Let's say I'm, not those Russians. Then in fiction, I represent a Russian person. Mostly he's a person who happens to be Russian. And I am looking at this Russian guy, and his marriage is just broken up, and he loves his teenage son so much, but the kid seems to be drifting away from him. And in the process of writing that, I become that Russian guy, because the writer is identifying the commonalities. That the Russian guy has is going bald, and he talks. He thinks very funnily and truthfully about going bald, and I go, oh yeah, that is so true. Suddenly now there's a mind meld going on where I'm that Russian, and in the process you go, oh, I actually don't have anything against Russians. That's sort of a cheesy example, but I think the process of imagining someone else's reality has the effect of softening the boundary between me and other. Right? right? So over the course, if you make an energetic practice of reading, you're constantly being reminded that what you think is you is temporary and porous, and it's not as rigid as you think it is. So the effect is to soften, so that when someone cuts you off in traffic, you think, I've done that. You know, that on a different day, that could be. So I think that's what I mean. You know, whatever habitual ideas you have, it stops them from being hardened. I think, and that's true for reading, and I think it's also true for writing, as you know, because you have to imagine another person. And even in that story, Victory Lap, there's an abductor, like a really terrible guy. Well, because of structural reasons, I had to write a scene from his point of view, which I really didn't want to do. But as you're doing that, you know, you're thinking about who he is, and you even become softened towards that guy a little bit, because you're thinking about the details of his life and his habits of speech and thinking and so on. So I think it's kind of a useful thing to do. You know.
Okay, I think that might be a good place to end. Thank you, George.
Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you.